Hi everyone, it's Mark from counselling.supervision.com.au. I wanted to touch today on acceptance and commitment therapy a little bit, just one aspect of it, and that's the element of functional contextuality or contextual functionality, whichever way you want to put it. I always forget how Steve Hayes puts it: contextual functionality, functional contextuality, whatever. Doesn't matter. It ends up being the same thing. So that functional contextualism dictates, or not dictates, but pretty much states that whatever you do or whatever client does in a particular situation is either functional or it's not. And you go like, yep, duh, that's interesting. But it also means that sometimes something that is functional in one particular context, in another context, is no longer functional. And I think that's a really important thing for clients to understand, but for you as a practitioner to understand as well. It took me a while to get my head around that, but now that I think I get it, I find it very useful to tell clients about this and to work with them on this one. So how does that work? Well, for instance, and this is an example I actually use with clients. For instance, if you have had a really busy week, day, month, whatever else, and at the end of the week, say you decide to have a couple of glasses of wine because you really want to unwind and you think that a couple of glasses of wine will actually help you with that, then in that particular context of being tired, of having had a busy week, the 2 glasses of wine could actually be the most effective thing to do to unwind. And in that particular case, using wine as an unwinder is useful. So in that particular context, using wine is functional and it's an effective way of dealing with your stresses. Now, if in other contexts you're super stressed and you now find out that wine actually makes you feel calmer, and therefore every time you're stressed you start to use wine as a coping technique, most likely in those particular contexts wine is no longer functional. It becomes a not so very helpful coping technique that could lead to addiction and all sorts of other problems, but it loses its functionality. And I think that's something for people and for clients to understand, not necessarily with a wine example, but in a similar manner. If they have learned particular coping strategies to deal with particular situations or particular contexts, in those particular contexts, whatever that coping strategy might have been, could have been helpful, could have been useful, could have been effective. So therefore, in that particular context, it was functional. Say that they learned mindfulness of breath, or they learned body scanning, or they learned another way to just park their thoughts and get on with stuff. That could be really functional. But if you keep doing that, keep applying the same thing, rubber stamp that same technique in all sorts of other circumstances as well, in different contexts, that particular technique might not be so effective. Another technique might be useful or more effective, more useful. So the functionality starts diminishing, starts going away. And I think that's something for many clients to realize. Sometimes I do that. Because say, for instance, with anxiety or depression, they have learned particular coping skills and then they keep applying that same coping skill over time, but then they come to me and say, it doesn't work anymore. Generally, it's not about the coping skill as such. It's just that the context of their life has changed so that that same thing that was so useful in older contexts is no longer useful in newer contexts. So the idea would be to potentially learn something else, or to do the same thing but in a different way, or to learn to distinguish between contexts, if that makes sense, so that they can use one coping skill here and another coping skill there, even though the two situations might look relatively the same, but they're actually not. So I hope that makes sense, because I see clients often have little light bulb moments above their head if they see that whatever they thought they were doing in terms of coping or working with and just rubber stamping a particular technique in all sorts of situations no longer makes sense in a different situation. The context has changed. It's no longer functional. So I hope that makes sense. Ask me questions about it, because I think this is the core of what acceptance and commitment therapy is about. If what you do works, keep doing it. But if what you do no longer works in a particular context, you might as well not do it anymore, because the chances are that you'll get all disappointed and the actual technique doesn't work anymore. So it's not about what you do, it's about what you do, in what context you do it, for whatever reason you're doing it for, and you want to match that up in terms of effectiveness and usefulness. So, bit of a long-winded story, but I think that there's quite some wisdom in understanding that acceptance and commitment therapy part of the psychological flexibility model is what you're doing still effective in that particular context. So if you've got questions about that, feel free to ask. I love ACT. I'm studying it whenever I can. So you know where to find me. Let's keep talking. Have a great day.